Well, it made me sad, but it made me realize how easily any of us can choose to do the wrong thing, can choose to hate. It's really easy to do.
You're listening to Radio Free Mike. Welcome to Radio Free Mike, the podcast about freedom and its discontents. My name is Michael Scott Moore, and today we're talking to Diane Foley, the mother of Jim Foley, an American journalist who was kidnapped like I was in 2012, but held by members of ISIS in Syria and finally beheaded on camera. Diane has written a book called American Mother with the help of Irish novelist Colum McCann about the hostage ordeal and its long echo. The book describes her meeting with one of Jim's captors, Alexanda Kotey, after Kotey pled guilty to charges regarding Jim and several other Western hostages. He's serving a life sentence in a U.S. prison. Diane now runs the Foley Foundation in Washington, D.C., which speaks up for hostages, and Colum is a co-founder of Narrative 4, a global storytelling nonprofit. Diane and Colum, welcome.
Thank you. We're honored to be here, Michael.
Great to hear from both of you and see you. I wanted to start just by talking about the overall story, Diane. The two of you have both written a terrific book, but I was actually in captivity when I first heard about Jim, and I was lying on a floor in a prison house, and I was listening to the BBC World Service on a shortwave, and that's when I first heard about Jim in Syria. And so I want you to tell us just what happened, how he wound up going to Syria in the first place.
Well, Jim came late to journalism. He was a teacher first, was in Teach for America for years, and did some creative writing also. But finally in 1999, I believe, or 8, he went to Northwestern Medill. He decided he wanted to tell stories about real people, real things that were happening.
That's a journalism school, a good one. Yeah.
Yes. And I think partly because 3 out of his 4 siblings were in the military, he was drawn to some of the conflict that was occurring in the Middle East at that time. And Afghanistan, Iraq, wanted to know why the plight of civilians and why soldiers would join the military.
Got it.
So that's where he began, really. It was in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Right. And he went to Syria to write about the rebellion and the Arab Spring. And it was an extremely complicated sort of situation once the rebellion started. So when he got kidnapped, it was not actually clear who caught him.
Absolutely. It was very unclear.
And so when you learned about it, you and the family, it took a while for you to realize that he was actually in the hands of ISIS. Exactly.
Because of the influx of foreign jihadists and the Assad regime, it was very hard to tell what was happening, particularly in Idlib in northern Syria at that time. There were so many different factions in that area. We really weren't sure.
Right. When did you learn exactly who was holding him?
Well, it was primarily in the fall of 2013. That is when we had several people reach out to us to say that they had seen Jim or heard his voice in captivity in Syria. Wow. And it was shortly after that, in Thanksgiving of 2013, a year later, that we actually got some ransom emails from the captors.
Yeah, he was captured near the end of 2012.
And
it was almost a year before you actually heard something about the case.
A full year. It was Thanksgiving of 2012 when he was kidnapped. And then it was just the same time of year when we heard from them.
Yeah. And you knew who they were once they contacted you? It was fairly
No,
clear?
we still did not know. They
Okay.
really didn't identify themselves, except that it was obvious that they hated the West, hated Westerners, and that was very obvious. But they did not clearly identify themselves, no.
Did you know what ISIS was at that point? Was that?
We had heard of the group because
Yeah.
we had several efforts looking into what was happening. And however, the team that we were working with really thought Assad had Jim in one of their prisons.
Got it. Yeah. And that was an equally bad scenario. I mean, the idea that he might have been held by the government was also horrible because those prisons were black holes. Yeah.
Exactly.
I started to hear about ISIS for the first time through the radio while I was being held in Somalia. I mean, whatever the BBC was reporting at the end of, it had to be the end of 2013, not earlier than that, was my first introduction to the idea of this even more radical group, a group that was trying to establish a caliphate in Syria and was essentially trying to outdo Al-Qaeda with some of its rhetoric and some of its behavior, especially towards infidels, towards people outside the Muslim fold.
And that was part of their plan. Jim was kidnapped early on when they made a plan to raise money, to raise funds. They intentionally started targeting foreign nationals, and particularly journalists or aid workers who were in country.
Right. And why? Because they were easy.
Well, yes, and they hoped that they would be able to collect, ransom. That was the intent.
Because they were from the right countries, in other words. From the U.S.
Because they were from the West. They hoped to recoup ransom, and they did from all the European countries because they were all released, whereas the British and Americans chose not to negotiate, and therefore they were killed.
Yeah, right. Well, and so when I first heard Jim, so he was kidnapped, almost a year after I was kidnapped. So I had never met him. I know plenty of people who met him in the field, reporting here and there, but I had never met him, and I didn't know his name until he was killed. So when his death was announced on the BBC in August in 2014, so this is over a year and a half after his capture. That was, I learned his name along with most Americans, I think. And it had a real effect on me. I mean, it had a really, because it was obvious that we had been in similar circumstances when we got captured. And the first thing that a pirate did that morning when the story was announced, because they heard it on the Somali service of the BBC, was come up to me and say, "Michael, it's not going to happen to you." I'm like, "Yeah, I know that, but tell my mother that, please." Exactly. I don't know what my family knows or doesn't know. So by then it was clear that pirates were not going to try and make an example of me because they were only after the money. But ISIS was after something else. And so...
Primarily was when after our government chose not to negotiate, then they wanted money. Initially, I think they wanted money too.
Yeah,
they really were looking for money, but our government refused to engage. So they knew that was off the table.
What was their initial demand?
It was for hundreds of thousands of euros and certain prisoners. Definitely directed. Yes, both. They wanted both. But it was definitely targeted to the government. And when our government would not engage, they stopped contacting us.
Yeah, right. Wow. And and Jim's killing was the first in a series. I think it happened after that every week or every 2 weeks that they...
Well... I think Stephen was killed. In early September, and then Peter in November. Yeah, and then Kayla was found dead in the next year.
Right. So it was clear that they were going about it in sort of a programmatic way.
Right.
Yeah, and really, I mean, when I heard some of those reports on the BBC too, they interviewed people like the men who were holding Jim, who were essentially London jihadists. I mean, they were people who were raised in Britain and went to Syria to support this project of a caliphate.
Right. Definitely.
So they had London accents, and they were talking about how normal it was to have, the heads of their enemies on stakes or something like that. I don't know who they interviewed. I don't think it was the actual people who were holding Jim, but the people I heard on the BBC they sounded like they were from another planet. I mean, in terms of what they thought was good, Now, how many of there were 4 men who were holding Jim, and also, I learned from your book, probably responsible for capturing him too. So they were also his kidnappers.
Yes. We think Kotey and Amwazi actually kidnapped Jim.
Wow. Okay. Kotey is Alexanda Kotey. He's one of the 4 Beatles, so-called, and Amwazi is known as Jihadi John. He was probably the man in the video, wasn't he?
Yes.
Who probably killed Jim. I think Jihadi John was killed in a drone strike, but Alexanda Kotey and the other 3 were arrested. Kotey was arrested and brought to the United States and tried here in Virginia, wasn't it, in Alexandria?
And also his colleague Al-Shafi al-Sheikh. They both were brought to Alexandria after much negotiation. It required quite a bit of negotiation with Great Britain and others.
Were they first arrested in Britain?
No, in Iraq.
But
for them to be extradited to the United States, because the British had a lot of information on them, but the death penalty needed to be waived before they would share it.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was President Trump's first administration, and they insisted on the death penalty initially. Mm-hmm. So it took a while.
And the British said, well, we can't necessarily extradite under those circumstances, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. So eventually they came to Virginia, and you saw them both get tried. What's incredible, yeah?
Well, Kotey pleaded guilty to all 8 counts. He chose not to go to trial. It was his colleague Al-Shafi al-Sheikh who went to trial.
That's right. Okay. And what's also remarkable is that after Kotey pled, you met him. You made
quite a bit later. I mean, a good,
after he was sentenced and everything, after everything was done.
Yes.
Essentially, you decided to meet him in person, in a very controlled sort of place, but his lawyers were there. And but Colum, you went into the room too with Diane.
But the most remarkable thing, excuse me, Michael, I just wanted you to know, is that Jim really chose Colum to be the author. And I really wanted a story because, like any journalist, we know that how important stories are. And that's how people remember different situations. But I couldn't do it. I certainly wasn't a writer. And but the years were going by, and it was really, I had the honor of meeting Colum McCann on during COVID, when he was on a book club at Marquette University sharing about his amazing book, A Paragon. Yeah. So it was in that setting that we connected. And he very generously came to visit us shortly thereafter. And that's how we became friends. And initially, in my stubbornness, I still wanted to write the book. And Colum was trying to be my story whisperer. Got it. But as we got nearer to the time of the trial, I was more and more stressed. And he was curious, being a good journalist himself, and interested enough in the story that he was the only one who was willing to go with me. My family thought it was ridiculous that I was going to speak with Alexanda Kotey. But so Colum graciously came, and that's how he happened to be there.
And I noticed in your book you said that Jim was a fan of Colum's and had one of his books. You noticed.
Yes, that's how Colum became curious about Jim, because when he was well, Colum can tell that part better, but I believe somebody sent you some pictures of Jim reading your book.
That's right. I mean, if sometimes the world just comes along and it delivers people to you. I mean, I do think that Diane is one of the bravest, most courageous, most insightful of people that I've ever met in any ilk. But in particular, in this particular situation, to be allowed to come in to witness the story, to go into the room in Virginia, in the courthouse in Virginia, and walk alongside Diane as we walked across that big, echoey room. It was filled with lawyers and court clerks and police and all sorts of people. But essentially, after about 2 minutes, it came down to just two people, and that was Diane and Kotey. And we met over the course of 3 days. And it was probably three of the most extraordinary days that I've ever witnessed between two human beings. It was really, really remarkable. And my respect for Diane, and therefore my respect for Jim, and my respect, say, for the situation that you went through and you so beautifully articulated, I feel like I was allowed to become witness to the extraordinary human spirit, I suppose.
First of all, thank you. And also, I'm also a big fan of yours. And so, I mean, at least as much as Jim. So what was that like in the room? The way you describe it in the book, Colum, is this incredible but very light tension. It wasn't clear whether Kotey was quite grasping, the gravity of the moment. But I just, you said it was one of the most remarkable interactions you've noticed, but tell me a little more.
Well, I think that I think Diane would agree with me on this thing. I felt the presence of something extraordinary, and whether you call it the Holy Spirit, or whether you call it the human spirit, or whether you call it both of these things laced into one another, it was absolutely there. But I think Diane would say that she had forgiven him before she walked into the room. But she wanted him to know what he had taken from the world. And they sat and they had the most remarkable conversation. When she walked across that room and she said, "Hi, hello, I'm Diane Foley," and suddenly the world just became a different place. And I felt to talk about Jim.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but this has been a free preview of this episode. And the whole thing is open to paid subscribers to Radio Free Mike. So if you'd like to hear the rest, please hit the link in your show notes or in the body of the email we've sent you and upgrade your subscription over at Substack. Then you'll be able to listen to the full episode on any platform. Thanks for listening.
Beside